we do have most folks here in the room. My name is Monica Coughlin. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at the Governor's Office of Information Technology. And on behalf of OIT and CDOT and the state, I'd like to welcome you and thank you for coming to today's session. We are really looking forward to the conversation with all of you to talk about the utilization of state-owned broadband assets and how private sector can better leverage those in helping the state find broadband solutions. We are still faced with a pretty big gap when we look at broadband availability across Colorado. In the urban areas, when we look at the entire state, we're somewhere around 90% or so of households that have access to what the FCC defined as broadband. But when we look at those rural areas, that number does drop pretty dramatically. And it is around 60% of households that have access to broadband. So today's discussion will be very helpful and valuable and looking at how we can better utilize those state assets to help with bridging those gaps in service that we face across the state. Before I get into going through the agenda for today, it's my honor to introduce a couple of the governor's cabinet members who are here with us today and are going to say a few remarks to help set the tone for today and kick off the discussion. We have Suma Nalapati, who is the CIO for the state of Colorado and also the Secretary of Technology. And we also have Shailen Bhatt, from the Executive Director from Colorado Department of Transportation, who are going to say a few words here today. So first off, and we also have Irv Halter in the room from DOLA, Department of Local Affairs, who's also joined us, so thank you for being here. I'd like to ask Suma to join me up here as my boss to say a few words.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Broadband is a very, very important discussion. I'm sure a lot of you heard the governor's State of the State speech. It's almost like water, electricity, and basic fundamental things that have, we take for granted, right? So broadband is right there along with those essentials. So it's a very important discussion. So I truly thank all of you for being here. Thank you, Irv, and thank you, Shailen, for helping us lead these discussions with all the providers that are available here today. Thank you. Again, ensuring Colorado has reliable, affordable, cost-effective broadband, and how we make that happen, because it's a critical infrastructure for health services, for education, for private institutions, all of that. So we value your contributions, your discussions, and we want to see how we can move the needle in the right direction with broadband. So I'm looking forward to the outcomes and what happens today. It's going to set the stage for some very more important discussions. So thank you all so much, and I'm going to turn it over to Shailen. Thank you, Shailen.
Can everybody hear me from here? So I'm just naturally loud. And Monica, thank you for qualifying that to a few remarks, because I could talk for a while. But I want to say I will echo what Suma talked about in terms of how important this is. And normally from a DOT perspective, when I was in Kentucky, when I was in Delaware, normally we're coming to this as the group that has all of the right-of-way that people want to put stuff in. And wouldn't that be great? And I always viewed myself as like the sacrificial lamb that was sitting there where people were already carving up what we view as an important asset of ours. But now the conversation has changed a little bit, because we as an agency, we launched our RoadX program. We're about to hire a chief data officer. And under this RoadX program, we are preparing for the future of connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles. And so from our perspective, our right-of-ways that don't even have dark fiber, but are just sitting there as unfilled tracts of land, essentially at this point, are underutilized assets. So from our perspective, it's not a question of we have an asset now that you all want. It's we have an asset that we want to be part of the conversation. to drive this forward. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of cool things about Colorado. There's a lot of great stuff going on here. Broadband is an area where we are behind the curve a little bit. When anybody here from Mississippi? I always like to ask that. When I was in Kentucky, I was a deputy with the Department of Transportation there. They had a saying, "Thank God for Mississippi. Otherwise, we'd be number 50 in a lot of things." Right? Well, here, I will say Kentucky is actually further ahead of us in terms of things that they've been doing, things that they've been deploying. And so you can't ever rest on your laurels. You can't take things for granted. And so I'm excited that with our team, with this team, that we can put Colorado on the map and really drive forward a positive outcome so that in a couple of years, we have communities that have access to really what is the utility of the 21st century in broadband access. So I will stop talking there. I'm grateful for everybody to come, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you both. And I also want to recognize we also have Anna Ewing here from the Office of Economic Development International Trade, and she is the Chief Operating Officer and another partner that we've all been working very closely with as we look at broadband solutions for the state of Colorado. So before we get into the meat of today's agenda, we did want to do some introductions around the room, just so everyone knows who's here today. And should I pass the mic for the streaming purposes?
We've got.
Oh, you've got one. So if we could just quickly go around the room, I think enough of us, or a few of us, that it won't take all day to get around the room. Just want to get name, title, and company or organization that you're here with.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Washington. I'm with CenturyLink, and I'm with the account manager that supports the state of Colorado.
I am Paul Schiff with Zayo and Long Haul Dark Fiber Product Manager.
I am Austin Canal with telecommunications. I'm the voice product manager.
Jeff Brown, Bureau Wireless, and I'm the Vice President of Data Services and Roaming.
Good afternoon, Pete Kirchhoff. I'm Executive Vice President of the Colorado Telecommunications Association. We represent 26 rural independent phone companies and 2 rural C-lines.
My boss.
Kevin Kelsey, General Manager of Plains Cooperative Telephone, one of the 26 different sites.
Mike Brazell, Park County Commissioner. Abel Chavez, Government Affairs for CenturyLink.
I'm Tim Kunkelman. I'm with CenturyLink as well. I'm the Regulatory Director for the state of Colorado.
I am Alex Miller with the Viasat Exceed Satellite Internet Marketing Department.
Hi, Stephen Stein. I'm also with Viasat, by the Exceed and Wildlife Service here in Colorado, and I'm the General Counsel at Consumer.
Again, myself with CenturyLink Solutions. I'm the Manager of Public Vertical Markets, and we're involved in broadband. Just a little bit of extra is that we're designing some of the systems around the state. Yeah, I did Rio Blanco County, so we designed the wireless part of that.
Charles Agello, Director of Operations at Satellite Solutions. Chris McIntyre, Director of Operations, PK.
Juliet Hamer with Crown Castle, Account Executive.
Dan McLeod with CenturyLink Solutions on the CLO.
Jennifer Price with AT&T, I'm the Director of External Affairs.
John Champagne, with ComEd, Business Development and Capital Planning.
Greg Winkler, Regional Manager, Department of Local Affairs.
Nate Wallowitz, Regional Broadband Coordinator for Northwest Colorado Council of Governments.
Charlie Ansel, the Department of Local Affairs.
Chris Debner, Vice President of Business Development.
I am Judy Ushio. I'm with GB&W Consulting. I'm the Midwest Division Manager.
Dan Lubar, Slopeside Internet broadband provider.
Ryan Rice, Director of Transportation Systems Management and Operations for CDOT.
Said Sobi, Intelligent Transportation Systems Manager for CDOT.
Good afternoon, I'm Peter Kaczynski with the RoadX program at CDOT. I'm Rich Sembrat with CDOT in the Intelligent Transportation Systems Area Systems Performance and Support Manager.
I'm John Williams, CDOT Intelligent Transportation System, IT structure.
Good afternoon, I'm Keith Bangus, Governor's Office of Information Technology. I'm the manager of the Public Safety Communications Network.
I'm Pam Monsees. I'm also from the YT, the Public Safety Communications Network Program Manager for the DTR.
I'm Megan Chadwick with the Governor's Office of Information Technology. I'm the Broadband Communications Manager.
I'm Cass Rezzigoli from OIT.
I'm Sri Garamala from OIT. I'm a business manager supporting Monica.
I'm Anna Ewing. I'm COO of our State Office of Economic Development.
Hello, I'm Simon Sequoia, also Director for Government.
And do we want to go through the phone? Is it going to be possible?
No, they can't.
Oh, it's just streaming. It's not, okay. We didn't have people dialed in. Okay.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. I'm going to just quickly go over some of the efforts to date that the state has been doing with regards to broadband and talk about what's led us to the conversation we're going to have here today. So there's a number of things that the state has been doing over the last few years. One is mapping and mapping broadband availability across the state of Colorado, and that is based on feedback from and input from many of the people in this room here today. And that helps us to understand where we have gaps and look at the areas where we need to focus on and finding broadband solutions. We've also been doing a lot in the way of planning. OIT and DOLA have been working very closely together on various planning efforts, and felt like I cut out for a second. And so there's been a lot of work in that space, working with local communities to help them assess their environment and understand where they have gaps, what assets we do have available to them, and start looking at what are potential solutions. We've also been doing a lot in the way of coordination and collaboration efforts. So earlier today, many of you, I believe, were at the meeting we had here in this room, Conversations for Connected Colorado. We hold quarterly meetings pulling together key broadband stakeholders from across the state to, in an effort to help coordinate efforts that are happening so that groups in different parts of the state can hear what different communities are doing, learn from their successes and mistakes and challenges, and help one another out. We've also created a broadband portal, kind of a one-stop shop of various broadband-related activity happening in Colorado. We, over 2014, legislation was passed around broadband and telecom areas, and one area in particular was in establishing the Broadband Deployment Board that is looking at grants to communities where there are unserved areas. And then we've also done a lot of work in regards to education and helping to educate people on what broadband is, why it's important, some of the ins and outs, kind of the Broadband 101 type information. And then we've also established a broadband working group, which is a cross-agency working group that has members from OIT, CDOT, OEDIT, DOLA, DORA, CDLE, a lot of the agencies that play critical roles with regards to broadband. We're meeting regularly to really look at how we can ramp up the state's efforts with regards to broadband and have a very strong coordination that's happening with that group. And that group reports back to the Economic Development Working Group, which is a cabinet level working group. and that gets rolled up into the governor's office goals and plans. One of the things that we've heard through all these efforts from many of you in the room, one area where the state can really help is to look at the state's assets and how private sector can better utilize those assets to help with broadband solutions, which is the reason for the discussion here today. And we really want this to be a very interactive discussion and want to really collect as many ideas and thoughts from you all as possible. We have a couple people here that are taking notes for us to make sure we do capture it all. So look forward to that, and we'll get into it in just a second here. In terms of the agenda for today, the first part of the afternoon, we're going to focus on fiber. And Saeed from CDOT is going to come up here in just a moment to talk about the state of affairs with regards to fiber in the state and what the opportunities are, what the challenges are, and then open it up to a very broad discussion with all of you to get some ideas. And then the second part of the afternoon will focus on other broadband assets, such as towers and buildings, leveraging rooftops, rights of way, and do a very similar format. Brian Shepard will go through kind of the ins and outs of the other broadband assets in the state, challenges, opportunities, and then we'll open it up to a discussion across the room. So with that, I think logistics, I think we're pretty good. There are, people do need to step out. We will have a break at one point, but there are also, if anybody does need to step out at any point for restrooms, back through those doors in the corner, and then there are drinks and snacks, so please help yourself at any point. I'm now going to hand it over to Saeed and Brian.
And for those folks that are listening to the YouTube stream, there's a document, a shared document that you can ask questions for that we're monitoring. There's a link on the Eventbrite site that you use to register. So again, it's the Eventbrite site is colorado-asset-utilization.eventbrite.com, and you'll see a link to a Google Doc. That document, you can type in your question. It's got a spot for your name, your organization, and your question. And we've got folks monitoring that. So as you type that question in, you can add that in the conversation.
Thank you, Brian. And good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about fiber today and explain some of the assets that we have and how we do our agreements and setup. As I said, I'm the manager of intelligent transportation systems for CEDA. One of my areas of responsibility is managing our fiber assets. That includes developing partnerships and agreements, as well as the management of the asset itself. So I'll go through a short presentation, a few slides to give you some background and give us some food for thought, and then we'll open the floor for discussion after that. Here's what I would like to cover today. We'll talk about the purpose of the fiber network for CEDA, what our assets currently consist of, and what is our vision for future expansion of that. The reasons that we are interested in doing partnerships with public and private sector, and our approach to those partnerships. So I explain those in a bit more detail. In terms of the purpose of the fiber network for us, the main goal of it is for us to
integrate our intelligent transportation system and use that for managing traffic and incidents on the highways. I put some examples of things that we do with this asset. These are the electronic signs that you see, the traffic signals, the many types of sensors that you may even not see as you're driving, but make major contributions in our live and real-time management of traffic. We have a major system control software that relies heavily on the reliability of this asset. We have traffic operations centers, where that's the nerve center of our system, and again relies heavily on the availability of the fiber. Several toll road, US 36, I-70 PPSL, these projects all have heavy aspects of ITS in them that are integrated into our traffic operations centers. And as Sharon mentioned, we are going into connected vehicles, new, very advanced technologies, and we are again going to rely very heavily on the availability of this system. What we do in that area supports our end of the day goal of CDOT is transportation safety and mobility. One of the things that, again, is important to point out here is that these assets from CDOT's perspective is for transportation purposes and not for us to compete with the industry. Current fiber assets, what we have today, which is about nearly 1,000 miles of fiber assets, has come from either CDOT directly doing projects and installing the fiber and going back and sharing it with the industry and public sector, or there are instances where we have partnered and acquired either conduit space or dark fiber from the industry. I wanted to mention that we have, as Sharon mentioned, this asset is going to expand as we expand. The RoadX program is rolling out, and we are going to expand our ITS system in support of that. We do have a vision for expansion of our fiber assets, and I think, sorry guys. Sorry about this, guys. Yeah. There it is. And I'm not going to go into a lot of details of this, but I wanted to share with you is that we are prioritizing our future vision for our expansion of the assets. And some of the criteria that we use, so we have come up with a vision of priorities from 1 to 3, and our basis from our perspective, where we want to go with this asset is based on some of these criteria that you see. We want to have redundancy in our system, because if we are managing I-70 and peak period shorter lane, and a fiber cut takes place, we don't want to lose the system. We want that redundancy. So that's one of the perspectives that we would like. Corridor classification, how critical that corridor is to the whole transportation system. RoadX projects, how the corridor that we are going into is going to be instrumental to the expansion of RoadX and RoadX projects. The importance of the corridors for operations, transportation safety and public safety, and travel information. Some of the criteria from our perspective that have gone into developing our priorities. Again, I don't want to go into the details of it today or right now, but if you have any questions or you want to know about it, we can talk about those later. This is in a draft form, pretty close to being a final, and I'll be happy to talk to you about that.
Yeah, so just go back to PowerPoint.
Yeah, there we go. All right. So CDOT's reason for entering into partnerships, a few things I've mentioned here is, one is maximizing the use of assets owned by both the public and private sectors. The areas that we have partners, as I said, there are places where we have built infrastructure and share them with the industry, or the industry that has infrastructure and we have shared that with. Minimizing the negative impact of construction and disturbance to the right-of-way. So every time that we do this sharing, instead of having to go and do another project, and some of these corridors are really sensitive environmentally. Some of them are, we have very limited right-of-way access, construction, and many of these corridors that are our most important corridors for operation is really tight. And every time that you construction and disturb, you are imposing delays on the public, you're imposing safety, and you are affecting the environment. So that's a really big benefit from our perspective also. And by doing all of that, we realize time and cost savings for all of us. In terms of approach that we have had to partnerships, first of all, as you probably from the industry perspective have frameworks to work with, and we have certain federal and state laws that govern how we do these partnerships. We have been for many, many years, many of you in the room know that we have partnerships, have been open and continue to be open to do partnerships with public and private sector to the benefit of really, at the end of the day, the people of Colorado. Our partnerships with the public sector usually have been focused on government offices, and again, we have a state out of getting into being a provider like a private sector entity would be. And one last thing to mention, again, for everybody's knowledge, you probably noticed, our assets are usually along major transportation corridors. So we don't go a lot into the last mile from a local agency perspective. That's just the way our focus is on major transportation corridors. So with that, I'm going to open the floor for discussion and question. I also asked Rich Sembrat, he has a lot of experience in doing these agreements and developing partnerships, and John, who is our technology manager, to be on hand in case questions come up that they need to chime in. So we'll open the floor for discussion.
One of the things we really want to hear about is, for those of you that have done business in other states, other areas, what have you seen work, what have you seen not work, what are we doing right, what do you think we can improve on? Just really, give us feedback about this whole process and what your thoughts are. So, and this is your chance. Like, you want to ask questions.
Thank you. I'll kick it off. I don't know, in other states that I've worked in, we've used things like abandoned water mains, where 50 years ago when they first put in small mains, now they take those out and they put in great big ones. But often they leave the infrastructure still there and nothing's been done with it. And so we've had some experience where we'll go in and pull fiber through those abandoned water mains, which is a great cost saver and also time saver because you don't have to do all the construction. I just wondered if, as you're looking at all these different ways to get into the highways, if you've looked at anything like that.
I don't remember specifically that example. I know, for example, in Glenwood Canyon, I think we used bridge boxes for some of, because Glenwood Canyon, like I said, some of these highways are environmentally extremely sensitive. And on those corridors, we do use anything that we can find that reduces the disturbance. So an example, not exactly the water mains, but similar is we use bridge blocks to build our conduit.
Sheila, or Saeed, that's just for a question to my mind. I know in some of the areas, and even in the metropolitan areas, I've had folks approach me in the past about the issue of bridges and overpasses, and that's really the only, whether it be a local municipality or a county or a private entity, they've got everything taken care of, but they need to cross the highway. Can you talk about a little bit about what your guys' policies on that in terms of access to the bridges and some of the infrastructure that exists in bridges and overpasses?
Many examples along all the highways when we are crossing crossovers, we hang this infrastructure to the bridge. So that's, if I'm understanding the question correctly, that is a common practice.
Is there going to be a detailed list of the infrastructure that's available, the partnership operated by towers, number of fiber strands, where they terminate on each end? Is there an actual inventory list that you're going to make available so that we know what's available?
Yes, and that information is on the map that I just showed you, and we can either provide a map of what assets we do have, or in a tabular format. Either way, it can be provided.
And that's one of the things what we've been working on for a while, is to figure out how we have a lot of this data, but obviously some of it's sensitive. We don't want to publicize all of this data, our tower locations, our fiber locations, to the world. So that's what we want. And again, perhaps some feedback on you guys about how we take some of this data that is potentially sensitive and share it with folks in a confidential way. Is that just an NDA that we can, kind of a standard NDA we have with the state that covers all the agencies? Some thoughts on how we do that, because we have a lot of data now.
I think maybe related, we've heard some news, for example, in Utah, where Department of Transportation took the lead of being a clearinghouse on an asset swap program, where they take the assets that they have and then also sign an asset swap agreement with other entities, public and private, to get those non-disclosure agreements in place so that they can consolidate all the assets, both public and private, in one place. And then what they do is they say, listen, if we have, for example, excess pairs or strands in our fiber, we can swap those with another entity that needs those for some other use. So, and we do a lot of wireless work. So if we're building a vertical asset, do a swap where free leasing the vertical asset in return for fibers. And what the Department of Transportation in Utah does, is my understanding, is they're the clearinghouse to sort of put a value on those assets and keep track of how that trade is going. And then after some period of time, there's a true-up period. Is that something the state's looked at? Would the OIT office or DOT be interested in playing that role like Utah has?
I don't know of an exact replica of that. I know that through our partnerships with various industry organizations, we have that ability through them to, for them to go into agreements with others. But I don't know, Brian, if you know of an arrangement similar to that in Colorado.
Nothing like that exists, no, but that is exactly, that has come up, and that's one of the ideas we've had, is can we provide that mechanism to do exactly that? One of the issues that we stumble upon is to have a comprehensive list. We need information from the private sector. Some private entities are very willing to share their infrastructure data with us. Some entities have said they will not share their infrastructure with us. So I think that's a great example, and we'll take that back, and that's, again, why we're here to learn. But to do that, we would need a pretty good list of both public and private infrastructure. So we would need the cooperation of the private sector on that.
If I would add to that, like Brian said, we have considered that idea. Has not been implemented, but I think that would be a very helpful tool, something like those ideas to streamline the administrative process for both sides also.
Thanks, Brian. I'm just going to ask a question for probably everybody who's not in this meeting. If you're working for a county government or a city government, and you're sitting here around, Matt had a lot of stuff on it. Really briefly, just could you go through, or maybe just ask your colleagues to go through, what the process looks like for a public-to-public kind of concept where you're perhaps working with a municipality, and also if the municipality is working with a private sector company. So what's the process for getting access to assets? You know, not in tremendous detail, but just generally speaking, bullet point kind of approach. Thank you.
Right, for public to public, we have many of those, and usually the way it works is the local entity approaches us, and in my office is managing the whole asset. So you could contact us, and we start that dialogue. As I mentioned, our relationship with local agencies, with government entities, is to the point where it's for government use. It's for connectivity between government offices, for example. We cannot go into the commercial part of that. That's where we're using our partnership with the industry to accommodate those needs. And then, so if there is a commercial need for fiber, that needs to be accommodated through private sector. We are happy, and we have tried to work situations where that can happen, where our fiber can, we partner with the industry where the fiber can become available.
Can you be more explicit about what that partnership actually looks like? Contract?
It's an agreement or an MOU between between CDOT and the letter. Not a letter, more formal than the intent.
For most government agreements, it's either what's called intergovernmental agreement or an IGA or a memorandum of understanding, which is an MOU. So depending on the jurisdiction and their home rule and how that fits in the state guidelines, one of those two legal structures is usually the way we do it.
Great. One last quick question, and since you have some of your colleagues here have the ITS moniker on their job titles, there's a private entity, I'm just speaking hypothetically, private entity that wants to build infrastructure for ITS from wherever they're from. How would they approach you if they already have maybe a relationship with a local county government to do that type of work? How would they approach you, or would they approach you through the county government or the people who are interested in supporting access?
If it is primarily the industry wanting to do a partnership, they would approach us directly, and we will find out and negotiate the path to making that happen. If the public entity wants to have an arrangement where you need a couple of fiber to connect your court to your school to that kind of thing, then we can directly talk.
Other questions? I know Utah was brought up. Is there any other states that folks have done business in that you would, point to, other models, other ideas from other states? Come on, guys. You guys have been yelling about this for 2 years to set this up, so give it a chance.
I just had a question. Kentucky was raised as a state to look at best practice, and I believe the transportation director has experience with that. Can you share from your perspective what was done in Kentucky that really pushed them to the top?
So it was after I had left. That might be the first. Secondly, there's a federal, I think somebody wants to there's a federal program, but what it took was Governor Bashir. It's like, we're going to do this because remember the whole poverty issue there. They went out, they took advantage of the federal system, but it was more like a concerted effort and the private sector, true partnership. But it's a success story. There was some questions raised in
who got some of the money, but by and large, there's a lot of, just a lot.
Yeah, and I think what Shailen's referring to is, so what Kentucky did was utilize some of the federal funding streams that exist, specifically the E-rate program, which subsidizes the development of fiber to schools. And what they partnered with the state. And so the state, working with local school districts, basically said, we're going to throw in any state asset we have, whether it's fiber or building. We're going to allow you to have access, work with us to get these subsidizations for the fiber to build. And we're going to do this comprehensively and go out and essentially build a network across the whole state that is open access. And so the method they used to do that was a public-private partnership model, which some people have said is a good model, some people have said is a bad model. But I think what Shailen's referring to is that concept that the state essentially stepped up and said, okay, we're going to help you part of the solution. We're going to work with all the localities. They worked with the cities, the counties, and said, what are you willing to throw in the pot? Here's what we're going to throw in the pot. They went to the private sector and said, what can you guys do for us? Let's pull in some federal money. And so they really basically, cobbled together a large consortium of both public and private interests to develop the network. Again, how they went about it, I know there's debate about whether the ultimate model is the right model or not. And so, what we're really interested in doing is saying, how can we, on the asset piece of that, how can we follow that model where we say, we have local assets, we have state assets, we've got private assets. How do we make all those work together?
Similar program or effort that we have made here. We have a lot of partnerships with the universities and school districts, various districts in Colorado, where we are sharing our fiber with them to facilitate their access. We have partnership with eGovernment, similar to the government of a federal program that also has placed fiber and has shared fiber with various entities in Colorado. So somewhat similar program we have also pursued.
Additional direct questions?
Do you guys foresee any federal grants or Colorado stimulus money to build some of these routes you're looking for? The partnership obviously we like also. Just wondering if you guys had anything on the horizon where there's going to be a substantial investment where we all can kind of help grow the network together. And just a follow-up is I think you guys are doing a great job in being progressive and allowing the rest of the telecom folks to share their right of way or come up with these partnerships. I've been in states where that doesn't happen. Congratulations to Colorado for doing it.
I'm not aware of a specific federal funding that's available at this moment, but I can tell you, as you mentioned, that those partnerships have been a tremendous help to both the industry and CDOT to be where we are today. In terms of federal participation, the example of eGovernment is one that we have capitalized on, and that gives us a lot of assets. But sitting here today, I don't know of a specifically set aside federal funding that's going towards this.
As a follow-up example of, again, how we're working together, I know, CDOT has prioritized some of their builds with the Capital Development Fund at the state legislature. And recently, they worked with us as OIT to say, hey, there's a stretch down in southern Colorado, that we're looking to finish. Is there a public safety element? And so we worked with them to, write a joint statement to the legislature to say, hey, this not only will help CDOT, this will help public safety, this will help a lot of people. So we're trying to get that message across as they do go, in front of some of the funding streams, that we work collaboratively to say this is going to help a lot of people in a lot of different ways.
Why do you talk?
Yeah, people don't.
The one thing I would just say on the federal side, I don't foresee there being a federal stimulus or certainly not a Colorado stimulus, but we get about $500 million a year as part of our surface transportation program, right? So the gas tax goes in, and what I would envision in the future is right now that goes to bricks and mortar, asphalt, concrete, that sort of thing. I could see the future whereby some portion of that is dedicated, as we're looking at connected and autonomous vehicles, towards putting in fiber, because particularly in rural areas, you're not going, unless somebody's putting that in, there's not a lot of demand. And I could see that being a leverage point for a public-private partnership partnership for us to work with the private sector to say, hey, we'll put it in some sort of use agreement.
And just following up on what Shana said, we have and we continue to use what state funds we have had or annual budgets to make these partnerships happen.
Need some specific questions before we jump into the tower conversation? We can continue this, but perhaps we'll other assets and continue. So,
thank you.
I'm just kind of curious with people that have partnerships today, what's working, what's not, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So the question is for the folks of you that do work with CDOT currently, what do you see as working well? What do you see as needing improvement? Any comments, suggestions?
I'd like to reiterate his right-of-way comment. You guys should be committed on your availability right.
The comment was that the right-of-way usage of right-of-ways is very positive.
Yes, very positive.
So shifting a little bit, in addition, fiber gets a lot of the headline right now. But we also know in an increasingly wireless world that there's a lot of other assets that will help us achieve our wireless goals. We actually have some parts of the state where when we've traveled, they've said, we're actually doing okay on connectivity, homes and schools and stuff, but they said the wireless coverage is not good, and sometimes some of our kids, can't do the work they need to do, and so we need to focus on wireless. And so one of the things we wanted to also talk about was what other assets do we have as a state that we could utilize and, like I say, throw in the pot to benefit this. And to kind of start things off, our objective and we're on these other assets, we're starting way behind CDOT because we really don't have a policy. And right now, I don't know of anything that if someone says, I'd like to use your state rooftops to expand wireless coverage, we don't really have a mechanism right now to accomplish that. And so that's what we want to develop. In terms of other assets, really the statement that our overall objective is to really maximize the effectiveness of these state assets while understanding that a lot of these state assets deliver critical government services, just as CDOTs do. And we can't disrupt that, delivery of critical government services. But at the same time, we realize there's space and there's room to maximize those assets. So when we talk about our assets, what are we talking about? Well, obviously towers come into play. It's pretty much one of the number one things. As we talked about rooftops and buildings. I know in some states there's they basically turned over all their rooftops to management companies and said you guys help us manage these and just get more wireless, as much wireless coverage out there as you can. There's various issues, easements and on state land and property. Obviously CDOT has the rights of way in along the highways, but there's other aspects where the state may have an easement or something, or a right of way, whether that's public land or whatever. That right now someone could say, hey, we're trying to connect point A and point B, but we have to go through state land. What's our process to do that? So can we make that process more streamlined? What can we do? So those are some ideas, and also other ideas. So we'd love to hear from you. Is there something else that you guys have seen again in other states where you said, hey, the state has thrown this type of asset or that type of asset, and we've really been able to utilize it? When we get into a lot of these conversations, some of these things get complicated. And one of the examples, towers is the one we get hit on the most. I probably had 2 calls in the last month about companies wanting to utilize our tower space. And at least in our state, I don't know if every single tower we own, but a vast majority of the towers that we own or manage are part of our statewide digital front radio system, which essentially provides voice communications for public safety and first responders across the entire state. And that's what they were built for. And we have to realize that we cannot compromise that. So the utilization and the public safety services are the #1 priority. So anytime that we have an asset that's delivering public safety services, we have to make sure that any additional utilization does not interfere with those public safety services. That could range from interference issues to access issues to a lot of different issues. And so we have to make sure we maintain that public safety grade of service. So that's one of the key aspects we have to realize. Complex ownership. There are towers that the land belongs to the Forest Service. The Bureau of Reclamation has a lease on it and owns the building. The state has built and owned the tower. And to try to track those agreements, so those agreements go back 30, 40 years, and to try to track down who gets say over what is a nightmare. We have packets this thick paperwork of loans from 1965 or leases, and so it can be really complex. So we might say, hey, yeah, you can use that tower. We can come into a great agreement, and the Bureau of Reclamation can say, yes, yeah, it makes sense. Let's do it. If the Forest Service comes in and says, then there's not a whole lot we can do. That said, we have had ongoing conversations, and there is a federal mandate to say we need to figure out how to make things easier on federal land. So, so far as I've had conversations with our federal agencies, they seem open to figuring out how we can do this, because they realize they don't want to build any more towers or buildings on federal land. So if we can maximize the use of the ones we have right now, that would be beneficial. Environmental, historical issues, obviously, again, we're talking state land, a lot of that land is protected land. Again, a lot of our towers, especially on the western slope, sit in federal land. Anytime you touch one of those towers, you have environmental processes, EPA, NEPA. It can get really complex and monotonous, and so we have to figure that out. On the building side, a lot of our state buildings might be state historical buildings, and so we can't just go up building whatever we want on a building that's a historical landmark. So we've got to be really cognizant about a lot of these issues. Local community, or I'm sorry, state statute. There's some state statute issues that have been battered around a little bit. Some people have looked into, does Tabor impact this? If the state's getting lease money from an entity, does that have Tabor implications? There's a lot of issues we have to deal with state statutes. Anything we come up with is obviously going to have to fit within our state statute. And local community involvement. I threw out the example about federal land. Some of our towers are on county land. So while we might want to manage the tower, a county actually owns the land. And so we have to fit within their local land use issues and work with the county. So there's a whole slew of issues that we have. That said, we don't want that to say, no, we just can't do anything. We want to develop a process. We know that a lot of municipalities and counties do work with private sector on their towers and buildings and so forth. A lot of other states do as well. So what we want to do is start a process to say, how can we, Colorado, develop a process that meets all of our goals and provide some of these assets to the public sector. And again, we're starting from scratch. We really don't have anything on books right now. So that's where we really like your input on what works, what doesn't work, what would you like to see us, what path would you like to see us go down, and how do we get there to better utilize some of these assets that can be used. So with that, again, I'm going to open it up to questions, and hopefully people have some comments. Because again, you've been yelling at me for 2 years to do this. So.
So you spoke a little bit about local community issues and jurisdiction. I think one thing that we've experienced in cell siting is sort of a punting of jurisdiction. So there are times actually when the state will have jurisdiction, particularly with CDOT, where CDOT will have jurisdiction, but because they're within a local community, they will say, even though we have jurisdiction, we'd still like you to go through the zoning process of the local jurisdiction. That's problematic for a variety of reasons. One is because you want us developing fast, and that slow walks the process. But two is, legally, at the end of the day, if the local jurisdiction doesn't follow the letter of the law, and they deny something that they did not have authority to deny, it puts CDOT or the state and AT&T or whatever company in a very murky legal situation about how we resolve the problem. So I think making sure that the state and CDOT are actually asserting jurisdiction when they have it will help move the process along.
That's good to know. Other comments?
In the earlier session, there was a discussion from one of the broadband consultants about the need for fiber diversity and redundancy. So the question that I have for you is, has the state considered playing a role in terms of developing a redundant network? That's obviously a public good that would benefit the entire state. Obviously, it's difficult for providers to make a business case to build a redundant fiber route when it already has a primary route. So redundancy is becoming a big problem with a lot of construction activity. We had a couple of fiber cuts in northwest Colorado and also in the Pitkin County Valley as well. So my question is, has the state considered really teeing that up as a priority and really looking at the state as a whole as opposed to community by community?
That's a great point. I guess I would say, first off, we don't want to get in the business of operating a network. So, your first comment, is the state interested in developing a network? We don't want to operate that. We want you guys to operate that. But to your point about, do we need to look at this holistically? Yes, and I think that's one of the reasons we're here today, is to talk through that and put together a statewide plan. Monica mentioned our working group earlier on. That's one of the issues we're looking at is, okay, do we take all these regional plans that we've been working on and develop a state plan, develop these gaps, identify where is there a major issue with redundancy? Does Durango only have one outlet, or Gunnison, or Steamboat Springs? And if so, where do we prioritize that, knowing that we've got limited state dollars? But can we, through this process, utilize some of these federal funding streams, whether that's E-rate or healthcare, all these things we've been talking about, to accomplish that? So to answer your quite long-winded answer, yes, I think that is a growing issue and something we're looking at. And when it comes like towers or buildings, one of the things we could look at is wireless a solution? Is wireless a cost-effective solution in some areas of the state that the state could throw some assets in there to say, if we get a wireless redundant path, at least it's there while we're figuring out, how to get a redundant path, fiber path, knowing that some of these redundant fiber paths are going to cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. So that is one of the things on our radar. Right. Yep. Rich. Good. Yeah. Good.
We here at CDOT, is this on?
No, I think it's
I don't hear it. At CDOT, we take that very much into consideration whenever we're looking at partnerships. And we look at redundancy as huge as a benefit for CDOT. So the map that Saeed showed up here before of our priorities, as you can imagine, if somebody comes to us and says, hey, we want to build in this area, do you want to partner with us? All of a sudden we look at our map and we say, oh my gosh, that's redundancy. Or we ask them, hey, what else do you have in the area if it's a private sector? Can you build us redundancy somewhere, even if it's up into Utah and around Wyoming and back down I-25? We're willing to go outside the state. We look at all that as part of the benefit that we can receive, and we ask for that. And as you can imagine, if we get that, all of a sudden our priority map has changed. What used to be a priority, maybe number one, maybe now falls to number 3. So we look at it very seriously because we understand that these networks that we're doing and the information we're getting to the public and the public safety that we're providing is very important. And if we can get, for instance, redundancy across I-70 West, that's huge for us. We're working on that right now.
I don't have a question, Brad. I was just going to offer something. The problem is I can't remember what state it is, but when Greg was up here in the morning session, he talked about DOLA being essentially focused on jurisdictional issues. Maybe they're a convener for this. I don't know. This is something I've heard about, which is essentially a fast track program. Basically, they had which I can't remember what state I can get this to you, but they had a program where most of the requests for access and right-of-way and getting access to state assets were funneled through a group, and it was a go, no-go decision pretty quickly, whether there was jurisdictional issues, whether it was complicated. For the ones that weren't, it was pretty quickly able to be approved and pushed through a process that was set up to make those things happen. Obviously, you know your assets more than I would, but it seems like I think it was North Carolina that they were doing it because there were so few assets that were under that kind of duress. There's a lot of rural places in North Carolina and a lot of local jurisdictions to really try to get access to some power. So just wanted to throw that.
So just to kind of think things through, are you kind of building off the comment about a clearinghouse, but taking a step further, we're saying it's not just a clearinghouse in terms of what is where and what is what, but also almost like a consortium where you say, if you're part of this, you agree that to develop a uniform set of policies so that if someone does come in and say, we'd like some fiber in this area or we'd like some tower in this area, that anyone that's throwing their assets into that consortium would basically say, okay, here's the parameters for yes or no answer, and you could provide that mechanism quickly. And then also perhaps to your comment about, jurisdiction, there'd be some agreement on, okay, if so-and-so wants to use this tower here or build a tower here, you agree to a modified or a quick zoning process or whatever that happens to be. Is that kind of what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. I think I'm sort of coming at it from the other side, which was I remember reading about how they put together a framework that everybody could agree on to do that fast track process. And I don't know whether we should got those kind of requests through. Might be a useful thing to think about.
Great. Any comments?
What we've seen, I appreciate it, and I'd be curious, Janine P. You talk about the issues with public safety systems and making sure that those are protected. We've seen success, for example, fire stations. Denver Fire Department for a long time said, we can't have any public wireless facilities on our towers because of those same issues. But what we actually found was that by having those facilities on their towers, they actually could take control of the interference, potential for interference, because they're now the landlord of that tenant. And so they can force that tenant to go through proper engineering methodologies to ensure that they're proactively analyzing potential for interference. Whereas when they didn't, another tower was built across the street and they had no control over that potential for interference. So I think the point was, it's really just more, it's not a shift in policy, but it's a shift in mentality of saying, not saying first, no, 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 until you can convince me to say yes, but say yes, as long as you follow these procedures. So it's a lot of the same concepts of, being more open, because what really happens is when a private industry reaches out to the public industry to say, we'd like to partner, typically it's lower level employees on both sides that are interfacing, and neither of them want to stick their necks out, right? So even though we have great ideas at a higher level, it still doesn't get done. So it's really a shift in mentality, really, that drives it first and foremost. From an access standpoint, a lot of private industry are successfully accessing federal facilities like military facilities and airports, and processes are put in well where every employee that accesses goes through background checks. So again, I think they're valid concerns, but a shift in mentality that says this can be done if it's done the right way. Say yes first until you can show me that you can't meet my qualifications.
Great, good feedback. Other questions? Prove I'm not above playing the teacher. I'm actually going to talk to our friends from Crown Castle. I know you guys have had conversations about some of the things you've done. Can you speak to some of the other states that you guys have seen work and not work? Do you like towers, buildings, that type of thing?
Yeah. So we have worked with different jurisdictions, different states, and have been successful with coming up with agreements to market the Arapahoe, Jefferson County, or the properties that they do have. So that's something that we have done. So I think it can be done, is knowing what the where the assets are and having a good, clean list of what we can use for co-location.
So in general, a lot of, I'm hearing a lot of concepts around data sharing and that kind of thing. In general, are you as the private industry opposed to disclosure agreements that would facilitate that sharing of data between us and you guys as the private sector? Just in general, is there any major, I guess I'll put it this way, is there any major opposition to implementing those type of structures so that we can share data better? Okay. I got someone from the governor's office here to witness that. So, good. Any additional questions?
Frank, can I ask this?
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
I haven't dealt a whole lot with the towers on our right of way, and the lady from AT&T, I'm sorry, I forget your name. But I was wondering, I thought that was really interesting what you were saying about the zoning and CDOT, and who does what. But I was wondering if you had an example you could share. So I just thought it was
I don't know the name of the specific site, but this did come up for us for trying to build a site on CDOT land, and literally what my PM told me is the word punt, that basically the CDOT has jurisdiction on that land, but asked that we still go through zoning, which ended up being a disaster. And then we at the end of it, I think, are still trying to sort out what has happened. And it's not the first time. So I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the site, and I'm happy to touch it.
That would help, and I think that's another thing. The more feedback, the more specific feedback we can get. We do get a lot of stories of, oh, this just didn't work in this situation. Well, the more we can know about the specifics, we can start to work through those types of those issues. So.
So Irv Walker here from Gola. Brian, and I don't know if we thought about this, but I think part of the review of the priorities, the program we're involved in is really about trying to get results. And so as we start looking for opportunities to use public infrastructure to support something that I think all want, which is to try to get everybody connected, there's plenty of ways probably to do that. I mean, you can lease, just like we lease fiber, or organizations, the government leases fiber from private organizations or companies. Is there a way also to do it in a different way, to say, okay, we will allow you to use XYZ, whatever infrastructure that is, this, with lots of details involved, but then say, in return for that, we expect you to have these communities connected to this level by this point at this time. Okay, that be part of the discussion. Because if we're going to use publicly owned infrastructure, then we ought to expect, whether it's going to be some kind of money, or in this case, an in-kind, if you will, result that says, hey, we'll let you get that tower, but I want to see this much capability in that community by date certain, as a quid, if you will, for that. And that would be negotiated, obviously. It wouldn't be lock hard. It's just something to think about there. And this is a dumb fighter pilot thinking out loud. So please excuse if that's what everybody thought already. The other thing, I am sensitive to the point that we can't become overly bureaucratic. And I think somebody else said the idea of sometimes the easiest thing to say, especially at a lower level, is no. And so if we commit to this, I think at the state level, Simon and others, we need to think about the answer is yes, and anybody below can say yes, and the only person that can say no is somebody at a very high level, whether it's cabinet level or just below that. Be very specific about who can say no, so everybody understands we're going to yes, until you convince, like in my department, you come to me and you convince me, Irv, it'd be great to say yes, but here's the reason we can't. And then I'm the guy that walks in and says, you have to modify what you're asking for, or we have to, this is when we can't go this far, we need legislative change, or whatever it is. But I think it's very important, and I think it's a worthy thing. We shouldn't, it's hard enough for us to get through our bureaucracy, we shouldn't try to force you through it if we can help. And so just a thought there as well.
So I think that's a really great point, starting at yes. I think when we're talking about state assets, one thing that we've experienced is the difficulty that happens when the state is actually the landlord. And a really interesting thing happens because the state is movable by public opinion. And so when we go through a planning and zoning process, there are only a specific number of reasons someone can say no to a wireless facility. But a landlord can say no for any reason. And so when we are dealing with an elected public entity that's in charge of a public site, state-owned asset, and we are trying to place something on that state-owned asset that we hear clamoring for, and then there are some very noisy voices that come in very bad science and start speaking loudly, it scares off state and local folks who actually own those assets. We get to know a lot faster when we're working with publicly owned buildings and places where we're trying to co-locate because they are movable by public. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that if we're going to start at yes, it's important if we're going to bring our assets to the table to start having these conversations. And we work really hard to stay at deck and not be sort of swayed by some noisy voices.
I think it's a great point in terms of basing decisions on data and science, so to speak. When I was in the local at the local level, we once had a group that fought a zoning in the tower because they were convinced that the cell tower was going to be used to illegally track all the citizens of the city. And I think people live in up and said that. So
that Texas stuff.
No, it was here. It was right here in Colorado. So I won't say where. But, no, I think that's a good point in terms of, to me, that gets to having sound. There's procedural steps we need to take to make sure we check all the legal boxes and the use boxes, like the public safety issues and so forth. And then when it gets down to the data and the technology, the technology is pretty science-based, and so we can get to things based on, okay, will this technology work together? It's pretty clear, yes or no, it won't. And it's clear and definitive that if we say no, there's a reason why. A clear scientific or data-driven reason why. Additional comments before I turn it back over to Monica to wrap up?
Just say one thing about that. And I guess this gets into the criteria when you say no, because I think saying yes is a great place to start. But I think we also need to be really careful, especially once we start talking about towers and all these other kind of assets, is the overbuilding issue. Because we do have a lot of rural telephone companies that have loans are getting limited. The FCC starting to take away a lot of their universal service fund, and everything's based on lines or places they serve. And because a lot of them put a lot of their costs in when they were the only ones there. And now as other people come in and take those away, they're not able to fulfill their business models, pay off their loans, do some of these things. So I would just caution, as we make that criteria of list of when you do say no, that in addition to just the legal kind of aspects or what it might do to the state, that you also think of the other companies that might be out there.
I'll add to that by making another suggestion that I've heard about a state level tower registry. Just having tower assets in a place that, again, as much as you can, as much as it's appropriate to do so, maybe an NDA is in place before you get access to that. That's something that isn't necessarily a duplication of effort for what the federal guys do. I mean, great example, your colleagues here at CDOT. You have so much infrastructure deployed along roadsides that, to be quite honest, it's not just horizontal wiring. There's a lot of vertical assets there. There's also or potential for vertical assets if you're going down the ITS road in a big way. It just seems like that would be another enabler of shared infrastructure and shared costs. So just throw that out as well.
Okay. Any additional comments, questions? Okay.
Well, great. We're happy to give everyone some time back today. We're wrapping up earlier than expected, but also don't want to miss out on this opportunity. We've got a lot of very knowledgeable folks here in the room from CDOT, from OIT, DOLA, other areas. So since we are wrapping up early, I'm hoping folks can stick around for a few minutes if there are some questions that folks want to ask, maybe one-on-one afterwards. And in terms of next steps with this, we will be taking the feedback and input that we got here today, and it will help us in shaping our policies around the usage of these other assets that we were talking here in the second half of this afternoon. And we will definitely keep you all informed as we do that, and give other opportunities for feedback on that. And we'll also look into some of the other ideas and examples that were given here today, other states, the different ideas from other states, and I took a lot of notes today on those types of ideas that were brought up, and so we'll do some research on those as well. But want to thank everyone for coming here today and for sharing your comments and opinions on this, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you.